Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Let me start by saying thank you for your encouraging feedback and your overwhelming response. It motivates us to do better every day. And that's what we'll try to do here on the show. On Vantage tonight, we have some special stories and developments from around the world. Our lead tonight is about China, a story that a lot of you have been asking about. The devastating Wuhan virus wave. Is it over? Will it reach you? What really is happening in China? We have videos that you haven't seen before. Also, the threat of a full-blown conflict between Israel and Palestine, a special series called Vantage India, and a kind of oil that has invaded your life and may be ruining your health. First up, the headlines. Pakistan is staring at an economic collapse. The Pakistani rupee tumbled to 255 against the dollar today. They need another bailout to keep the economy going. Denmark is in talks with Israeli arms maker Elbit Systems for new mobile artillery. That's because Denmark is giving all of its Caesar howitzers to Ukraine. Azerbaijan has evacuated staff from its embassy in Tehran. It blames Iran for the attack, which killed its head of security and 2 guards. Will Japan make abortion pills available for the first time? Its health ministry is set to decide soon. The proposal was endorsed by a government panel. And Novak Djokovic reaches his 10th Australian Open final. He's 1 win away from Nadal's Grand Slams. Stefanos Tsitsipas stands in his way and his father is the one making all the headlines. A detailed report is coming up on the show. China's zero-COVID policy is long over, but COVID isn't. After the crisis in the cities, the virus is spreading to rural China. They're running out of coffins. The Chinese are celebrating the Lunar New Year in hazmat suits. The Wuhan virus has gone out of control in Tibet. Going by one estimate, more than 220,000 people could die in Tibet alone. 220,000 people. They could die in Tibet. And yet the headlines coming out of China paint a completely different picture. They say the cases have peaked, meaning the worst is over. Now, we sincerely hope it is. But we have no way to verify because China is not sharing the numbers. They're busy managing the data, not the Wuhan virus mega wave. It is taking a toll on people. And do you know who's the worst hit? Xi Jinping, the president of China, the man who dreamt of being the most powerful in the world. The man who's arguably the most powerful in China. He's called the chairman of all things. He controls the government, the military, the economy. He cracks down on business tycoons. He reins in dissenters. He even tries to control what people think. This very powerful man, whom global powers could not bring to heel, is losing to a virus. On Vantage tonight, we'll tell you how. We have 5 videos that show how Xi Jinping's policies have wrecked a nation. And before we begin, we would like to advise viewer discretion. The videos and pictures in this story can be disturbing for some of you. Video number 1. This emerged last week. It sums up the crisis in China. Take a look at this. What do you think this is? It looks like a departure board, the kind that you'll see at a train station. But this is not a train station. This is a crematorium in China. And this board is flashing live updates about cremations. It's been installed in a waiting area where families can keep track of the cremations of their loved ones. One cannot even begin to imagine their plight, bidding the final goodbye by staring at a screen. There are 3 status updates on the screen: cremation in progress, cooling down, and completed. And I don't know how to describe this. Dystopian, depressing. Do you know how many Chinese citizens have died in this wave? I'm sure you don't. Beijing refuses to share the numbers, but it cannot hide these pictures. We've got some satellite images. Let me show you a funeral home. This is on the outskirts of Beijing. In the first week of December, it had no parking lot. A few weeks later, There was fresh construction with a large parking space, and even that is proving to be insufficient. Cars are still lined up outside. Reports say crematoriums have been operating 24/7 in China, and the waiting time is now running into weeks. It tells you something about how many people may have died. And the same story is playing out in Tangshan in northern China and Suzhou in eastern China. Packed hospitals, overwhelmed ICUs and helpless patients. The Chinese healthcare system has collapsed. Video number 2, and this one is from Shanghai. Earlier this month, the hospitals there in Shanghai ran out of beds. They had to treat patients in hallways and outside emergency.
这都是在外面的，在外面，在室外，这些老太太躺在床上的。
The nightmare is still unfolding, and this is video number 3. Doctors and healthcare workers are miserable. They're sick themselves, but they cannot take a break. A doctor in Zhejiang broke down on duty.
那你不行，你还是要跟院里领导说一下，你要弄个人差不多的。
到谢谢。好了，抽血，然后这边1楼打药。你可以先药打了，然后先去血抽掉，然后边挂边等。
There are many pictures and videos like these. Even the Chinese censors, the Great Firewall of China, cannot block them. The Wuhan virus has caused so much misery. It is now threatening Xi Jinping's grip on power. The Communist Party is facing a serious challenge from within. Video number 4. Workers in China are revolting. Take a look.
国家法律的行为，请你们在10分。
These are workers in central China. Why are they angry? Because they were laid off. They worked at a factory that made COVID testing kits. Demand has suddenly dropped because China has ended zero COVID, so people don't need testing kits in large numbers. And this factory sacked its workers. Reports say it refused to pay wages too, hence the protest. When the riot police showed up, the workers pushed back. And this is not a one-off case. The working class in China is up in arms, it seems. In November, the protests got out of hand. These are workers at a Foxconn plant. Foxconn manufactures iPhones for Apple. Apparently, the company had delayed bonus payments to the workers, and that's what triggered the protest. They dismantled barriers. They threw them at officials in hazmat suits. In some regions, workers are putting their lives on the line. Our fifth and final video is from Hunan. Some workers who did not get their wages climbed to the top of a building and threatened suicide. So this is what it has come down to. China is unraveling. Public anger is mounting, and all of this poses a direct threat to the power of the president. And it's not like this virus cannot be contained. The rest of the world has found ways to do it. We found ways to live with the Wuhan virus. But its spread is devastating China because of the incompetence of the state, because of poor policies and mismanagement. Last year, Xi Jinping almost invaded Taiwan. He consolidated power at home. He secured a historic third term as president. But now he faces the biggest challenge of his career, thanks to a homemade virus.
An Indian becoming a UK PM.
Well, it's not like that we are going to get the Kohinoor back. But at least India is on its way to the top, huh?
But Gautam sir, there's actually not much to celebrate.
Why not? An Indian is ruling the UK.
Indian leaders in third countries often tend to overcompensate for their minority handicap.
Key.
For example, Sunak's Home Secretary of Indian origin, Suella Braverman, disapproved of India-UK free trade because it would encourage people immigrating to the UK, and the majority of whom were Indians. Structurally, India and UK have passed faggot, but still hasn't been resolved. And that is why,
Ladies and gentlemen, India needs to significantly temper its expectations from Rishi Sunak. Presenting Vantage with me, Palki Sharma, a first-of-its-kind global show with an Indian perspective. An outdoor story that's still developing. What I'm about to show you might remind you of a video game, but it's happening in real life. Looks like a Hollywood movie, doesn't it? Except this is not a movie. This is a real military operation. Israeli Defense Forces conducted a raid in West Bank, one of the deadliest raids in over 2 decades. It triggered a response from Hamas. It's a Palestinian militant group, Hamas. The Israelis call them terrorists. So Hamas hit back, and both sides have launched missiles at each other since. This is raising the fear of a fresh conflict in West Asia. The latest round started in Jenin, a Palestinian city in northern West Bank. The Israeli forces carried out a raid. At least 9 Palestinians were killed, among them an elderly woman. Why did Israel launch this operation? They say they were going after terrorists. It happened in a refugee camp. The Israeli forces entered a building and detonated 2 explosives. The raid left a trail of destruction, not to mention widespread public anger in the West Bank. People chanted slogans to express solidarity with Jenin. This was the moment when tensions escalated. Hamas militants in Gaza fired rockets at Israel. Israel responded in kind. It conducted airstrikes on 2 locations, a rocket manufacturing site and a militant training area. Meanwhile, Palestinian leaders have snapped security ties with Israel.
President Mahmoud Abbas calls on all Palestinian forces to an emergency meeting to agree on a comprehensive national vision and unity to confront the Israeli aggression.
The region of Palestine is divided into 2 parts, the West Bank and Gaza. It is administered by what is called the Palestinian Authority. They've not had an election in almost 2 decades. Gaza is ruled by the Hamas. The militant group also calls itself a political party. The West Bank is managed by the government of Mahmoud Abbas. The Palestinian Authority now wants the United Nations to intervene. They plan to move to the UN Security Council, the UNSC. They also want an investigation by the International Criminal Court. Now, all of these are aggressive moves, and they're being made in response to Israel's actions. Israeli forces are stepping up raids across the West Bank. I have some numbers, in fact. More than 170 Palestinians were killed in 2022. They died across the West Bank and East Jerusalem. This month, at least 29 Palestinians have died, and this includes 5 children. The United Nations says 2022, last year, was the deadliest year for Palestinians since 2006. But 2023 is already on course to surpass that if the casualties continue in this way. And this could have some dangerous repercussions. The United Nations says Israelis and Palestinians are on a collision course. Sounds like an understatement. But they're warning of yet another full-scale Palestinian uprising. The biggest concern is the rise of armed groups in the West Bank. In recent months, many of them emerged, and I have a list here. The Jenin Brigades, the Nablus Brigades, the Lion's Den, the Balata Brigades, and the Yabad Brigades. Small groups as of today, but they're armed, and they pose a challenge to the Israeli army. When Israeli forces conduct a raid, these groups respond by opening fire. They also carry out shootings at Israeli checkpoints. So what does this escalation mean for Israel? They have a new government with some coalition members who are labeled as far right. The government is led by Benjamin Netanyahu. He is the prime minister. He has given prominent roles to some controversial figures. Netanyahu himself has been quite aggressive about Palestine, and there's little to suggest that he plans to dial down tensions. He has clearly stated that he wants to take control of more territory. His government has made West Bank settlements a top priority, and these raids are a manifestation of that plan. But the Israeli Prime Minister's resolve will be tested. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to visit the region next week. He is expected to meet both Israeli and Palestinian leaders. This flare-up will cast a shadow on the trip. Washington is calling for de-escalation.
We recognize the very real security challenges facing Israel and the Palestinian Authority and condemn terrorist groups planning and carrying out attacks against innocent civilians. We also regret the loss of innocent lives and injuries to civilians and are deeply concerned by the escalating cycle of violence in the West Bank. I want to underscore the urgent need for all parties to de-escalate, to prevent further loss of civilian life, and to work together to improve the security situation in the West Bank. Palestinians and Israelis equally deserve to live safely and securely.
Safety and security is a goal that has long eluded this region. The fight for land has claimed tens of thousands of lives, and now with missiles being exchanged again, the conflict may only escalate. This, like I said, is a developing story. We'll be tracking it for you. We're calling this show Vantage, and we plan to highlight not just the issues that need to be fixed, but also those that are working to our advantage. We're bringing you a series of reports called Advantage India. And this is the first one. 2023 will be India's year. I'm not making a sweeping statement, I'm stating what is obvious. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For three key reasons, among others. Number one, India's G20 presidency. Number two, the SCO presidency. And three, India playing the role of a potential mediator in the Ukraine war. Let's tell you about India's growing role in global affairs, starting with the G20. This is the year of India's G20 presidency. G20, as you know, is the group of 20, G20. These are the top 20 economies of the world. India is a member of this group, and this year India is the president. G20 serves as a forum for international economic cooperation. It represents 2/3 of the world's population, 90% of the global GDP, and 80% of global trade, 80%. That's how big the G20 is. It can shape the future of the global economy, which is why this presidency matters. As G20 president, India is in a position to set the agenda for the group and by extension for the world. And the opportunity could not have come at a better time. The world is in a state of flux. G20 has to grapple with 5 pressing problems: Russia's war in Ukraine, Western sanctions on energy and the fight for resources, an impending global recession, fears of a new pandemic wave, and climate change. As G20 president, India will have to set the agenda for conversation. India will have to try to build consensus in an increasingly divided world. It seems like an impossible task, consensus building, when every country is driven by its own interests. So how do you convince the world to balance national interest with international responsibility? Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke about it.
Even if the world is in a deep crisis, we can still progress and make the world a better place. This is what the world needs most today. Shared knowledge that helps us overcome our circumstances, and shared prosperity that reaches the last person at the last mile.
When India assumed the presidency, this is what he said: one earth, one family, one future. That's India's pitch. It's ambitious, but it is worth pursuing. Which issues will India bring to the center stage? In a statement last year, Prime Minister Modi outlined his priorities, and we have that list: climate change, terrorism, pandemic prevention, global supply chains for food, fertilizers, and medical products. India will raise these issues at the SCO2. That's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO. India holds the presidency of the SCO as well. Again, the stakes are high. The SCO is not a small group. It represents 30% of the global GDP and 40% of the world's population. What's worse, it has always been divided. The SCO is known as a platform of disagreement. Look at the list of members and you'll know why. China, Russia, India, Pakistan. There is very little that these 4 agree on. Then we have Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. So 8 members in all, plus some observers. These are countries which are invited as observers. Now, this alliance, the SCO, has existed for more than 20 years. But it has failed to come up with a common agenda. So New Delhi's biggest challenge, again, will be consensus building. The focus will be on counter-terrorism measures, regional cooperation for Afghanistan, and improving connectivity. Well, how do you talk terror with a terror state? How do you discuss cooperation with a bully? These, we say, are the joys of diplomacy. And here's something I must point out. The presidency of the G20 and SCO puts India in a unique position. New Delhi can broker peace in the Ukraine conflict. The situation is ideal. And reports say India is already engaging in quiet diplomacy. Let me show you a report from November. It talks about a deal to resume vital grain exports from Ukraine. The agreement was announced in July last year. The United Nations and Turkey brokered this agreement. And this is all well known. But here's what many do not know. India too had a role to play in this agreement. Behind the scenes, India helped in selling this plan to Russia. India brought Russia on board, secured its agreement. 2 months later, New Delhi stepped up again. Russian forces were shelling the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. This is the largest nuclear plant in Europe. Russia took control of it in the early days of the war. The world was anxious about these attacks. They could have led to nuclear Armageddon. At this pivotal moment, India is believed to have intervened. Reports say New Delhi asked Moscow to back off, and it worked. Well, India can do this because it has unique leverage with both sides. It is the best place to play peacemaker in the Ukraine conflict. India can build consensus from this vantage point. It has access to both sides. At the G20, India can engage with the US and its Western allies, and during the SCO, India can collaborate with Russia and China. India's presidency at both forums can act like a bridge. So let me ask you this: which other country can claim to be in this position? And what's in it for India? Peacemaking could boost India's profile. It could set the country up to take on a bigger, long-pending role on the global stage. It can bolster India's credentials as a responsible power and bring it closer to an elusive prize, a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council, or the UNSC. As we speak, another meeting is on to build consensus for United Nations reform. And we're not holding our breath for the outcome. UN reform will take a while. But this year could prove to be a milestone in India's journey. This week, Ukraine witnessed a purge. There was a wave of resignations. As many as 15 top officials left their posts. They were either dismissed or they resigned. The purge came as a shock to the world. You see, Ukraine is in the middle of a war. The last thing Zelensky needs is a shake-up in the rank. But it seems the Ukrainian president did not have a choice. Some really big names are on this list. A deputy head in Zelensky's office, Ukraine's deputy defense minister responsible for overseeing supplies and food for troops, a deputy prosecutor general, and the governors of 5 frontline provinces: Dnipro, Kherson, Kiev, Zaporizhzhia, and Sumy. These are all high-profile names. They had direct access to the top rungs of power, and their exit spells embarrassment for Zelensky. He had some explaining to do, especially to his Western allies who are backing him.
Today, the public has seen yet another set of decisions on personnel that have been made. I emphasize the phrase, yet another. We will continue to take appropriate steps. The public will see each of them, and I'm sure will support them. Any internal issues that hinder the state are being removed and will continue to be removed. It is fair, it is necessary for our defense, and it helps our reapproachment with the European institutions. We need a strong state, and Ukraine will be just that.
Zelensky is clearly trying to play down the revelations. He says the system is being cleaned up. But the question is, why now? Why did he not do this cleanup earlier? After all, these corruption allegations and charges have been around for a while. They were not uncovered by some government watchdog. They were brought to light by Ukrainian journalists and anti-corruption campaigners. Take the case of this man, Tymoshenko. He worked in Zelensky's office. Last year, he was seen driving around in an expensive SUV. 2 months later, another report came out. Also more embarrassing pictures. This is Tymoshenko driving around in a Porsche Taycan. It's a $100,000 car, 100,000 US dollars. This is a man who worked in the president's office. He got a government salary and was living a life of luxury at a time when Russian forces were bombing his country. Why did Zelensky not act earlier? It's not clear, but now his allies are asking for accountability.
We're actively engaged with the government of Ukraine to ensure accountability. There are challenges associated with the current environment in which Our Ukrainian partners are in the midst of a brutal attack by the Russian Federation, but we take this commitment seriously nonetheless, and we're still able to take steps to ensure that accountability.
There are challenges. That's a rare confession from the US. Washington should look at these claims more closely. Let me show you another report. It's about food supplies for Ukrainian soldiers. Turns out the Defense Ministry is buying them at an inflated price. This came out this week. It compared the procurement cost with food prices in grocery stores. Do you know how much more Kiev is paying? At least 2 to 3 times more. Again, where is the accountability? When Ukraine was invaded, the world rushed all kinds of assistance to them. Lethal weapons, ammunition, wartime supplies, humanitarian aid, even financial aid. At least 40 countries, 40, stepped up to help. How much has Ukraine received so far? It's difficult to come up with a number, considering the sheer scale of this effort, but here's an estimate. $100 billion. That's how much the world has poured into Ukraine in less than a year, $100 billion. Now they want to know, where is this money going? And it's worth considering the past. Ukraine has struggled to root out high-level corruption. Transparency International has a corruption perception index. It ranks countries on the scale of the least to the most corrupt. There are 180 countries on this list. Do you know where Ukraine stands? At 122. It makes Ukraine the most corrupt country, the second most corrupt country in Europe. Now, if you're wondering what India's rank is, it's 85. Long way to go there too. But coming back to Ukraine, here's another estimate. And this is from last year. It says Ukraine loses $37 billion every year to corruption. So the red flags have always been there. And I'm not saying that the world should stop giving aid to Ukraine. All I'm saying is that we need better checks and balances. After all, this aid is coming out of a taxpayer's pocket. Ukraine's response to graft charges still leaves a lot to be desired. Just a few years ago, a job in Silicon Valley meant you've made it. It was the dream destination for many, but only a few made it. In 2022, it all came crashing down. The tech industry was one of the worst hit last year. This is an industry that saw exponential growth for decades. Last year, they were forced to hit the brakes. And the misery seems to have spilled over to 2023. The year started with the biggest tech giants announcing layoffs. Google laid off 12,000 people just a few days ago. That's 6% of the company's workforce, also the biggest layoff in its history. Google's parent company is called Alphabet. Alphabet CEO is Sundar Pichai, one of the high-profile Silicon Valley CEOs of Indian origin. He said senior executives will also have to take a significant pay cut. But that's little consolation for people like Justin Moore. Justin worked in Google. He got laid off. Do you know how he found out? His account got deactivated in the middle of the night, and this man had worked in Google for 16 years, 16 years, all forgotten in a moment. Fired by logging you out of your account, no prior warning. It's a tragic story, and it's not a unique one. It's happening to way too many people in way too many companies. Next on the list is Google's competitor, Microsoft. It is set to fire 10,000 people by the end of March 2023. Microsoft, too, is led by an Indian origin CEO. His name is Satya Nadella. His company has more than 220,000 employees, 220,000, and these layoffs will affect around 5% of its workforce. In 2022, Microsoft reduced its staff by 15%. And the timing of the job cuts is interesting. Right after the company introduced its unlimited time off policy. For those being laid off, it seems like a bad joke. Next up is Amazon. In the beginning of January, Amazon announced its plan to lay off more than 18,000 people. That's around 1% of its total workforce. Also the biggest job cuts in its 28-year history. Amazon has been trimming its workforce since November last year. Same with Meta, the parent company of Facebook. In November 2022, Facebook let go of 11,000 employees, mostly from Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp. This cut down the workforce by around 13%. Meta has also put a freeze on hiring till March this year. And remember, behind these staggering figures are faces. This is Himanshu. He was hired by Meta. He moved to Canada for the job. 2 days after he landed there, he found that he had no job. He'd been laid off. Now, these are the 5 biggest tech companies in the world. 4 out of these 5 are laying off people. Apple is the only exception so far. It has somehow managed to avoid brutal job cuts. And here's more sobering data. Close to 3,000 tech employees are being laid off every day this month. This is the average for the month of January, 3,000 per day. Big tech is having a midlife crisis, but the bloodbath is not limited to it. Recently, social media platform ShareChat laid off 20% of its workforce. Software giant IBM says it will cut 3,900 jobs. German enterprise software giant SAP says it plans to cut about 3,000 jobs. Chemical company Dow is going to fire 2,000 employees. 2 months back, HP Inc. announced 6,000 job cuts by 2025. 3M, the maker of Post-it notes and Scotch tape, plans to cut around 2,500 jobs. Spotify will lay off 6% of its workforce. And this is just a part of a very long list. If the last 2 years were about quiet quitting, doing the bare minimum at your job, this one seems to be a year of loud firings, mass layoffs all around. So if you still have a job to go back to on Monday, count yourself amongst the lucky. Our next story is about Novak Djokovic. He's playing to win his 10th Australian Open, his 22nd Grand Slam title. If he wins, he'll be tied with Nadal at the very top. But this story is not about his tennis. It's about the endless controversies surrounding him. Not very long ago, Novak Djokovic was deported from Australia. Now his father may meet the same fate. Our next report tells you why. Novak Djokovic is through to the finals of the Australian Open. But there was one important person missing in his camp, his father, Serjan. He skipped watching his son inch closer to making history and preferred to watch the match from the confines of his home. That's after a video of the father emerged recently. It showed him posing with fans at Melbourne Park with Russian flags. It caused quite a stir, and it's doing the rounds on social media. It shows a fan holding a Russian flag with Vladimir Putin's image on it. Photos also showed a fan with a large Z written on his shirt. All of this is controversial. The letter Z has made headlines in the Ukraine war. Russian forces have been using it on their vehicles. Those who support Russia's actions have also been sporting it. And Serjan Djokovic was seen posing with these Russian fans. When he realized it could spell trouble, he issued a statement. He said, and I quote, "I'm here to support my son only. I had no intention of causing such headlines or disruption." His superstar son refused to get dragged into the controversy. Novak Djokovic declined to comment. That was not a luxury that the Australian Prime Minister had. He was asked about the controversy and he reiterated Australia's support for Ukraine.
I'll make this point, that Australia stands with the people of Ukraine. That's Australia's position. And Australia is unequivocal in our support for the rule of international law, and we don't want to see any support given to the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Will the father of Novak Djokovic be deported from Australia? Prime Minister Albanese did not answer that. The fans seen here have been questioned. Police say they were carrying inappropriate flags and symbols. The incident took place at the Australian Open. It was after the quarter-final match between Djokovic and Russia's Andrei Rublev. You see, Russian and Belarusian athletes are allowed to compete in this tournament, but they must play as individual athletes. They cannot play with any national affiliation. So their flags are banned from the tournament grounds. And if the senior Djokovic seems to be making the headlines for the wrong reasons in 2023, in 2022, it was his son Novak. The Serb found himself in the eye of the storm over his COVID vaccination status. This was at the 2022 Australian Open. Djokovic was infamously deported on the eve of the tournament last year for not being vaccinated against COVID. His image took quite a hit. He was associated with he was labelled an anti-vaxxer, someone who's opposed to vaccination. Australia also handed Djokovic a 3-year travel ban, but it was withdrawn in November last year when COVID rules were relaxed. That's how he could make it for this year's tournament. He says he holds no grudges for what happened last year.
In a way, if I do hold the grudges and probably if I'm not able to move on, I wouldn't be here, you know. And also I have to see the amount of positive Positive experiences I had in Australia overwhelmed the negative experience maybe of last year. So, my impression of Australia, my vision of Australia has always been very positive.
So while Novak Djokovic continues to do what he does best, hit a tennis ball, he can only hope that his off-court antics do not derail his dream once again. After all, he's just one win away from making history. Tonight, I want to talk about palm oil. May sound random, but it's very important. Palm oil is everywhere, in your food, in soap, in cosmetics, in snacks, sometimes even in chocolates. It has been labeled a miracle ingredient. Palm oil makes our soap more bubbly, our chips more crispy. It can give our candles their flame and make our lipstick smoother. Like I said, palm oil is everywhere. In India, it is also on every street corner. Your favorite snacks, from fried chips to burgers to samosas and everything in between, has most likely been made with palm oil. Did you know that India is the largest importer of palm oil? And this story is not an endorsement of the oil, it is a warning against it. Listen to this carefully. Experts believe palm oil can promote heart disease, and it has been linked to cancer. It's found in practically everything you eat outside, which is why home food is health food and eating out too much is said to be bad for health. And palm oil has a big role to play in that. So how much is too much? What do doctors say? And what should you be doing? We'll discuss all of this, starting with an introduction to palm oil. It is one of the world's most produced, most consumed and traded vegetable oils. It is extracted from the fruit of the oil palm tree. They're found in tropical climates, and the world is hooked to this oil. I have some numbers. 3 billion people in 150 countries use products with palm oil. 3 billion people. On an average, one person tends to consume 8 kilograms of palm oil in 1 year. 8 kilograms per person per year. That's the global average. And most of us don't even realize how and how much we are consuming it. Going by one claim, there are more than 200 common items that have palm oil, and these can be snacks like chips or home or personal care items like soaps and cosmetics. So how did the world end up using so much palm oil? How did it end up in almost every product that we use? 2 reasons: low cost and high volumes. The oil palm, the tree that gives us this oil, is highly productive, so supply is abundant.
The other thing is that it's 50% saturated fat, which is a much higher rate of saturation than most oils, which makes it really useful to the food industry because it helps keep products shelf stable. And it also imparts the mouthfeel that food producers like, that consumers like. And then the last thing I would say is that it's so cheap. That's partly why it's so abundant, and it's so much cheaper than most other oils. So companies are obviously eager to use it. And that's also now that palm kernel oil is also being used in India a lot as a replacement for natural creams. So that high saturated, I mean, the fact that both of these oils are solid at room temperature, sort of suggests if you're getting that sort of solid stuff into your arteries, that's probably not going to be a good thing if you're getting a whole lot of it.
India is one of the world's biggest consumers. In 2021, India used over 9 million metric tons of palm oil. In 2018, consumption shot up by a whopping 230% in India. 70% of the vegetable oil used in India is imported. Almost 60% of this is palm oil. So one way or the other, we are all consuming it. How can the consumption be regulated? Well, some years back, Stanford University published a study. It looked into the possibility of a tax on palm oil, a 20% tax. That's what they suggested. It sounds like a lot, I know, but wait till you hear the conclusion. Researchers found that a 20% tax could save more than 350,000 lives, 350,000 lives, 350,000 people will have a reduced risk of heart attacks and stroke. Because palm oil can spell trouble for your heart. It has a high composition of saturated fatty acids and palmitic acid. Both of them are said to be harmful. They're known to raise blood cholesterol levels and promote heart disease. I have a case study. In the 1980s, Mauritius subsidized palm oil. It became cheaper, but the people of Mauritius paid a huge price for this subsidy. New cases of heart disease shot up dramatically. The problem became simply too big for the government to ignore. It started a health program. Soybean oil was subsidized instead of palm oil. Then the World Health Organization, or WHO, took notice. They studied the shift in Mauritius from palm oil to soy. And this is what they found: a 15% decrease in cholesterol levels of people. In the years since, more studies have been conducted, and they've all raised more doubts about palm oil. Here's what the European Food Safety Authority, or EFSA, has found. When used at high temperatures, palm oil can cause cancer. When this oil is heated, it releases something called glycidyl fatty acid esters, or GEs. It's a food contaminant. When digested by the human body, these GEs break down. They release a substance called glycidol. Scientists have studied glycidol extensively. They tested it with mice and rats. And here's what they found. This substance, glycidol, triggered the growth of malignant and benign tumors. Sounds scary. Well, critics say some of it is exaggerated. They say these studies on palm oil are not the last word. The sample size is too small. And there's also limited research on how much palm oil should be used. So we need more research. That's a given. Until then, what can you and I do? Should we stop using everything that has palm oil? Also, is that even possible? Well, here's what you can do. Check what you're consuming. Every packaged product has a list of ingredients. Eat out in moderation. Try substitutes like soybean or mustard. And remember, there is no alternative to leading a healthy lifestyle. Limit the use of oil. Have a good weekend. It's Friday night, and if you're planning a weekend party, here's something for you. The latest trends in fashion. They may not make a lot of sense. They may be a tough act to follow, but they're certainly worth a watch. Maybe for your list of what not to do. Because sometimes you have to look good even when you can't see, and strut down the runway when you can barely walk. Take a look. Can you guess who she is? Well, if you're as confused as we are, this is singer Doja Cat. She made a grand entry at the Paris Fashion Week, completely red from head to toe. Do you know what she's wearing? More than 30,000 blood red Swarovski crystals. How did they stick? They were applied on top of body paint. The makeup artist Pat McGraw says they spent nearly 5 hours to create this look. It was apparently inspired by Dante's Inferno. Now that's poetry in motion, quite literally. The reactions, though, have been mixed, and understandably. But this was not the singer's only look that made headlines at the Fashion Week. She attended another show, donning a fake curly mustache and eyebrows, almost giving off Salt Bae, the Turkish food entertainer vibes. From Who Is This to What Is This? Well, if you must know, that's Dutch avant-garde fashion house Viktor & Rolf's latest collection. This was at the Paris Fashion Week, where models walked down the ramp with dresses worn upside down. Gowns worn horizontally, and in some cases, clothes not even worn but attached to the body. They're calling these multi-tiered dresses, whatever that means. Clothes turned in every direction possible. Talk about fashion turning on its head. The show had a lot of whimsy, with seemingly gravity-defying dresses remaining in place. Something which is on brand for Viktor & Rolf. They're known for their innovation in the fashion world. From wearing clothes where you can't see to having to strut down the ramp when you can't walk. Say hello to impossible heels. Supermodel Kristen McEnemy took a tumble, not once, but twice. This was at a Valentino show. The supermodel is 58 years old. After the second fall, she looked visibly angry, simply took off her shoes and walked the rest of the runway barefoot. While some fans criticized the fashion house for making ill-fitting shoes, the model said the fault was hers and that there was nothing wrong with the shoes. Either way, the moral of the story is this: catwalk is no cakewalk. Sometimes fashion defies gravity. A lot of times it defies logic. How about an $1,800 Lay's potato chip bag? Yes, you heard it right, $1,800 for a Lay's chip bag. What's so special about it, you ask? Well, it's from the fashion house Balenciaga. These bags were unveiled in October last year. Some called them unpalatable, others thought this was one tasty tote. It caused quite a stir. Again, classic Balenciaga. They've turned bizarre into a fine art. Earlier, the fashion house came out with an IKEA bag. Cost over $2,000. IKEA, as you would know, is a furniture brand. It sells an almost identical bag for 99 cents. If you don't like IKEA, how about a garbage bag? A designer garbage bag, courtesy Balenciaga. Because one man's trash is a fashion brand's income. Each bag is for $1,790. As Balenciaga would have us believe that nothing is trash in fashion. If your mind is blown, we don't blame you. And finally, it's time to wrap up with Vantage Shorts, images that tell the story. This one is about climate change, an issue that we plan to pursue because climate change is real and it's here. Its enormous turmoil is often discussed in terms of big changes. For example, the world is about 1.1 degrees Celsius warmer than it was in the 19th century. The amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere has increased by half. But today, let's talk about the smaller events of consequence. An iceberg roughly the size of London has broken off in Antarctica. A Balkan river has turned into a floating garbage dump. And Argentina's drought has killed more than 3,000 cows. We're leaving you with these images. Thanks for watching. See you on Monday.
An Indian becoming a UK PM.
Well, It's not like that we are going to get the Kohinoor back. But at least India is on its way to the top. Huh?
But Gautam sir, there's actually not much to celebrate.
Why not? An Indian is ruling the UK.
Indian leaders in third countries often tend to overcompensate for their minority handicap. For example, Sunak's Home Secretary of Indian origin, Suella Braverman, disapproved of India-UK free trade because it would encourage people immigrating